feedback when we're getting too close to the mic? You know, when I could hear my voice.
Are you in the meeting?
It sounds fine to me, but I know that we need
But I used the
and we are on air.
Okay. I call the special session of Milwaukee City Council to order. This meeting is being conducted partly by video conference with members of the council and partly with members of the council here at City Hall. The public has been invited to watch the meeting via the city's YouTube channel, Comcast Cable Channel 30 in city limits, or by logging into the Zoom video conference as an attendee. The public may submit comments in writing by email to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. There will also be opportunities for limited in-person testimony. The public has been invited to speak during this meeting by registering by email to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. The deadline for registering was yesterday at June 8th at 3 p.m. When it is time to take public comments, staff will monitor the email inbox, the Zoom participant window, the Zoom chat, and the in-person audience at City Hall to see if anyone would like to speak. We will take comments in the order they are received. If members of the public become disruptive, we will mute and remove them from the video conference or from chambers. If that fails to stop the disruptions, we will recess the meeting and return within 5 minutes. If we are unable to continue, council will briefly meet off air to move unfinished business to the next council agenda. Okay. This is the comprehensive plan update ordinance continued from June 2nd. The continued public hearing on the updated comprehensive plan is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to continue to take comment on the updated comprehensive plan and begin council deliberations. Does any member of council wish to announce a potential actual or potential conflict of interest?
Is everybody having the same problem hearing Mark as I am with all the it's kind of a double voice and screeching going on?
I believe Councilor Heisey's mic was on, but I've muted her, so I hope that corrects it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Was there anybody that needed to announce an actual or potential conflict of interest? I didn't see any heads or any. Okay. The staff report will be given by Planning Director Denny Egner.
Are you ready? Thank you. Denny Egner, Planning Director with the city. Last week, on June 2nd, the council opened the public hearing on the comprehensive plan update and received a fair amount of testimony. The oral testimony and written testimony was documented in the staff report for June 9th in a matrix. The other materials that were included in that staff report were a list of ancillary documents. There was some discussion about ancillary documents, and we listed which ones were intended to be carried over and which ones did not need to be forwarded in the current plan. Since the staff report went out, there's been quite a bit of testimony that has come in, written testimony, some of which has been posted online and some of which just had come in this afternoon. The materials that were online included, I wanted to address the things that staff responded to first before I went into that. We had received some questions from Councilor Parks and Councilor Beatty. Staff made some responses to those comments and sent those out to the full council. In addition, just in the last hour, there was some additional materials sent out, which were the staff response to a comment that Stephen Lashbrook had made at the last meeting regarding the policy language about neighborhood hub compatibility. So Stefan's draft language is in that, along with a simple staff comment about that, just in terms of what we mean by compatibility. In addition to that, there was some language that was prepared really last week about the history section, and it just slipped through the cracks. We meant to send it out with the original staff report. It didn't happen, and recognized it late this afternoon. So that was just sent out as well. There's been quite a bit of additional written testimony that's come in again in the last 24 hours. There was additional testimony from Elvis Clark. There was additional testimony for the first time from Chelsea Wynn. Dan Eisenbeis has sent some written testimony, new testimony from Joshua Freeman, additional testimony from Celestina DeMauro, and then some combined testimony from Ben Rousseau, Dan Eisenbeis, Stephen Lashbrook, and Celestina DeMauro. Just in the last hour, something from Kim Travis, former Planning Commission chair. And then apparently last night, there was testimony from Jennifer Bragger from Housing Land Advocates. Staff was only made aware of that an hour ago, so we're don't have any responses to that. Most of the testimony that's come in, with the exception of Elvis Clark, I think has been is generally supportive of most of the housing policies and many of the outreach policies. There's some concern stated by Ben, Dan, Stefan, and Celestina about the DEI and policies and whether or not we have a program established, a committee established to address those issues. And they've, in their most recent email, they added anti-racism to DEI, so they had it described as DEIA. Jennifer Bragger, in her testimony, points out a couple of technical issues that I would like more time to address. I think I want to go back to the draft housing needs analysis and pull some data for you before trying to address that. We could do that at the next meeting. So with that, unless there are other questions, and I don't know if there are any folks calling in, but I'm open for any questions that you might have.
Before we move much further, can we all pause real quick? I need to make an adjustment to the public view of the Zoom. Just hold on real quick. It might take the off-air folks. Okay, thank you, Denny. Continue.
And if I may, Denny, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, I got a bad throat. I didn't hear you mention the testimony from Cole from Here Together. You might have mentioned that, but I maybe missed it.
I'm not aware of
that came in today also.
Denny, if you'd like, there's a number of, in the last hour that came in, I can read a list of names if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, that was one that I didn't see.
So since, some of this will be covered, but just since 12:53 today, we had from HLA, the Housing Land Advocates, I think is what that one was, and we had Cole Merkel. We had a correspondence from Kim Travis. We had a correspondence from Greg Heemer. We received something from Ben Rousseau. And then we received from Denny Stephen Lashbrook's comments, which I think he referenced and had some staff response to regarding the history. So that's the list of things I've seen in the last couple hours.
Yeah.
Was Ben's comment the one that was with Ben, Dan, Stefan, and Celestina?
Let me look. I feel like Celestina submitted separately, but let me double check.
She did, but it was the same. I think it was the same testimony as what we already had on file. I think it seemed like it. But I saw,
Yes, Mr.
I thought Ben
Rousseau's,
sent something separately also.
Mr. Rousseau's is from him, Mr. Lashbrook, Eisenbeiss, and Demaro.
Okay. Denny.
And I will just say, I haven't, anything that's come in since 1 o'clock, I haven't read. I mean, yeah, we need to be getting, if people want us to know these things, they should be getting them to us before 2 hours before the hearing. So, I mean, I'll read them before the next hearing, but I haven't.
We can put them in the matrix form for the next hearing too.
Thanks. That was very helpful. You talked about the history section, and I guess I was maybe reading into it a little discomfort in trying to write a more robust history of the Native American period and of the Black American experience. Did I read that right? Or
I think that is correct. There is some discomfort in that to be able to reflect some accurate, statements that might be well accepted by those particular groups. I'm not sure that we can do an adequate job in addressing those issues in a short time. We do have some time to address it, but it's just I'm concerned about writing something and getting it reviewed, and partly some of those issues you could write books about, and we have our comp plan has sort of a limited scope, and I think it's good to put something in acknowledging the issues, but whether or not we can actually write a good solid history, I'm just not sure it's appropriate. But acknowledging the issues, I think, is very important.
I think at least what bothered me about the way it's currently written is the sort of weight. It's like there's very little weight given to the Native American portion of the history, and then much more weight to sort of the settler early days of Milwaukee, naming particular characters, things like that. It just feels like there's more weight talking about a 50-year period or 100-year period, as opposed to the thousands of years that existed before that. And I just, I don't know if we reached out to the tribe, if they would have thoughts on what we could put there that would be more substantive.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mayor, and I do. We do have, excuse me, we do have a document that we received from the Grand Ron, editing essentially the portion for, there were a couple of years ago, the idea of Lot's Loop. And there was a section that was really heavily edited by someone from the tribe. And so I'm happy to share that along. I think I've shared it before, but I will definitely redistribute it. I think that will really round out that section, I think, as well as we should in a document like this. I hear you on the limited real estate that we have in this document, but I do think that things that are so that were so impactful in the way that our city developed cannot be ignored. And we can't do just I think, it's especially, I think I mentioned this last time, but, if we mention Bing, we have to mention also, the reason that Mr. Bing's family is not here today to have participated in the wealth that was generated by his work. Yeah. And so we have to mention the Chinese exclusion laws if we're going to mention the history of berry, of cherries and that. agriculture that was here. And I do think that there is, there's enough concise language in the literature already to describe, more thoroughly, but it does not, I don't think it has to be more than a paragraph in this context to mention that the housing opportunities that were limited to white people were not limited to, that were not available to anyone else. And especially that insidious history at different points along our city's history. It's well documented. This is not, we're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. There's a lot of information that we can gain from the Historical Society of the Oregon Historical Society, books that we've all read. And I think we do a total disservice by excluding some of those key points in history here. No one's talking about writing books. I understand and appreciate that that we have limited resources, we have limited time, and that this document, must be concise. But I think that we could do a much better job of it here. I've promised you language. I'm working on that. I will absolutely be long before next meeting. I will have language that I would like to have inserted. I hope you'll all read it.
That's great. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, I think particularly, because of the changes we're attempting to make in our comp plan around zoning, that absolutely has to be set up properly in the history. Otherwise, it gets lost on people. So that's why I think that piece is so important.
And I think, specific. I'm muted again. Mentioning specific dates, specific laws that were enacted, invites a reader to go do more research so that they can read the volumes that exist out there. Of course, this isn't going to be the sole piece of education to write, the history of Milwaukee's racist housing policies, but it's it should at least get people pointed in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I would love to see some sort of acknowledgement in that language, if we could, that speaks to, that acknowledges that we don't have the resources to write a Milwaukee-specific history, and that we are coming at this from the lens of Milwaukee is a great place, but these experiences happen throughout Oregon, and they are very likely representative of what happened in Milwaukee as well.
And continue to shape.
Can I just go back up, because I want.
You keep muting me. I think this is an easy one, so maybe we can check this off our box if everybody agrees. I was surprised that Alma Flores, Valeria Vidal, others, Vera, Sam, and Chuck, for example, were not included in the acknowledgements. I think that those are easy fixes. I hope you'll all agree that they provided extremely valuable and a lot of hours into this document.
I think Mary may have already made those changes in her draft.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions for Denny right in this moment?
Maybe, Denny, you said you were going to go back and look at the housing needs, the HNA. There are a couple of notes, and we can get to it later on, but there were a couple of notes that I have about references to the MHOUS. And I wonder if we need to go back to that document as well, because there's a couple of places where it refers to, let me just find my notes so that I'm not saying just totally out of nowhere.
Angela, I didn't understand what you said. Go back to what? I couldn't understand it.
I'm sorry. I want to find the MHOUS, the Milwaukee Housing Affordability Strategy.
Gotcha. Yeah.
There are many, many good program strategies outlined there.
Yeah.
In the comprehensive plan.
No.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't about spelling out strategies here. It was actually just a couple of data points that seemed strange to me. Why were we referencing a different time period for when we were putting together different pieces of data? So on page 104 of the draft, it's in a paragraph. However, between 2000 and 2018, the median home price for Milwaukee increased 58%. In the MHAS, we actually look at the period of 2000, I think it's 2012 to 2018. And I think that actually tells a much more accurate picture of the kinds of quick increases we've seen in Milwaukee, which in that period, 2012, 2018, it's a 92% increase in median home prices. And there's another section where I think that this on page, there's a graphic, which is great, but I have the same confusion about why we chose to use 2000. We cite our source as MHAS, but that is not the time period. So again, here it says increase in median home price in Milwaukee from 2000 to 2018. I don't know why we're using U.S. Census when in the MHAS, again, we use that 2012, 2018 data, which is the same thing we use on the right of that graphic for the multifamily. I'm wondering why we aren't referring back to the MHAS and if that's something that we can fix.
We can certainly fix it and make sure we've got the best data we can.
Yeah, I think that it's important to, if we're going to put those two pieces of data, especially side by side, I think, using the same time period, 2012 to 2018, and using the same data, the MHAS, I think that that's actually going to create a much more vivid picture of the environment we find ourselves in now. I think those are my only questions at this point.
Lisa or Wilda, do you guys have any questions? We'll just,
Well, I mean, I have a lot of questions, but because we were because Councilor Falconer made a comment about the acknowledgement page, I wanted to call out that I think the little box at the bottom that thanks people, instead of saying thanking people for their time, I think we thank people for your time. We're addressing those people who did it. And so let's change the two theirs in that paragraph to your, make it more personal. Also, I just noted just kind of a typo thing, but the consultants, I gather those last three are all, and I think they were all enviro issues as well. So I guess their affiliation was left off, but that needs to continue.
Mary, will there be bookmarks in the PDF when it's finalized? That would have been really helpful for me. I thought I saw a comment from the public about that somewhere. Maybe I just overheard someone talking about it. But PDF bookmarks, we get those in our reports, and that would be really helpful for this document as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I can do that for the next time. I'll probably need some assistance. I don't know PDF bookmarks as well, but easy enough for me to figure out and do it.
Yeah, more for me, for my own purposes, I'm not going to switch at this point since I have all of my notes are always in my PDF. But for the final version, for people who are reading it, or I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, that's a great idea.
We've also made a commitment to translate the final document into Spanish.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Cool. On page 11 of the document itself, which is a graphic with a bunch of really good data, I thought another one that would be really useful in there is the number or percentage of people that are housing insecure.
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
It's page 11 of the actual document, because we're probably all working on different packet versions.
On page 107 of the document, we do talk about in the housing section the percentage of renters who are cost burdened and homeowners that are cost burdened. But if it's easier, we can move that data to the beginning.
I don't think it's a bad thing to have it in that spot that it's in now. I just think there's kind of an overall snapshot on this page that really gives a sense of where Milwaukeeans are. And I think that's a really important one, particularly since I personally have a bone to pick with the poverty. To me, it's a completely meaningless data point, because it's based purely on calories and it has no reference to housing whatsoever. So I've never liked the federal poverty level. But the housing thing is very clear.
Okay. Well, most of these things are from the census data from the American Community Survey. Do we have that number from an?
I believe we do. If it's not here, it's probably in the MHAS. So we'll just make sure we get the right info and it matches all of our other data points that we have.
Thanks.
It was interesting because I read some of these against the current census data, and some of them are definitely different. Like the individuals below poverty line is actually somewhat lower in this current census data, but the percent of people with a bachelor's degree is higher. But the one that I really thought that I thought we ought to change is on the preceding page, on page 10. This the population number, 20,500. The current census status is 20,990. I feel like we ought to go with whatever's the latest at the time of publication when we adopt this.
I have a process question in that I'm wondering, so this is our opportunity to speak with staff about and get questions and answers clarified by staff. Is that correct?
Yes, except you could do that at any time as well if you do have questions before you adopt it. We're again in a legislative process, so it's the same sorts of rules don't apply as would apply to a quasi-judicial hearing.
Okay. I just wanted to know at what point we started going through all of our respective comments. It took me a while, but I actually did find the comments I submitted a couple of weeks ago. So thank you.
That's a good point, though, because you might want to consider their script text as to taking more comments. I don't know that we have any more comments, but it is a line you want to be wary of.
Yeah, I've been being fuzzy just to give people a chance to get here. And I figured there's no point in us all sitting here staring at each other while we're doing that. We can be, particularly these little onesie-twosie things that aren't like a policy decision per se, or that's going to take a hard vote. It's just a thing that would clean things up or make them more readable or more useful.
Sure.
In that vein, I've got another one that really isn't really a policy thing, but on plan background on page 25, it's the first paragraph, and it says, since the last update, Milwaukee has experienced a number of significant changes, including the emergence of new housing types. That sort of stuck out to me a little bit because I don't know that we're necessarily talking about new housing types. So I wondered if we might instead consider including the reemergence of housing types other than single unit dwellings, because I mean, history is that they were made illegal, not that they're brand new forms of housing, SROs,
Right.
multi-dwellings. ADUs are not new either. I mean, we're calling them ADU. That's a new name, but they're certainly not new. People have been living in, granny flats, which is not what they're called anymore, but for a long, long time.
What was the page number one more time?
25, I think. 25 of the document, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And where on page 25, which paragraphs are you?
Yeah, the very first paragraph, I would maybe just suggest the emergence of formerly legal housing types. I'll go out on
Formerly.
Well, or just, I think you're
Legacy housing types.
emergence or yeah. Well, you overlooked the glaring error of that paragraph, which is the first line. It has been over 30 years.
Yeah.
Milwaukee has updated the comprehensive plan, not nearly. So you can tell how long ago this was drafted.
So that needs to be changed, yeah.
Good call.
Okay, so Angel, help me out here. You're saying, so instead of saying including the emergence of new housing types,
I would say including the reemergence of housing types other than detached single unit dwellings.
Yeah, I like that.
okay, I can understand that.
And, here's another, this is less policy, but semantics, but maybe this is a good place to put it. Throughout the document, I would like us to stop using single family and multifamily. I think we need to, there are other localities have done this in recognition that that's a very limited description. It's very Eurocentric and homogenous view of living, fails to recognize the living arrangements that actually exist. And there is accepted, we could be using single dwelling and multi-dwelling instead of single family and multifamily throughout.
Yeah, because my house is a single house, but it's right now multifamily.
Many.
Even with Heather and I, it's multifamily. You're talking about generations and or people who aren't related living together or living in the same place.
Yeah, intentional collective living arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
Either out of economic necessity or cultural tradition. It ignores quite a few households in our city.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Muted. I agree with that.
Yeah, I understand it, but I'm okay either way. I know there's a ton of references to those titles, single family and multifamily. So probably throughout everything we have in the city, there are those references.
Search and replace. It's your friend.
That's part of Control F.
Yeah. Well, and if right now we're talking about those little kinds of things, there's also one that I sent to Denny earlier about, it's actually in policy 7.4.1A, the word foster, where it's about neighborhood hubs, where we usually have said encourage, encourage, encourage. And then we use the word foster, which also means encourage, but it also means to, I want to say this correctly, to stimulate or advance. And it would seem that we should stay with, to me, it seemed like we should stay with the word encourage. That's what we've used in the other things responding to that.
Well, but do you have a page number for us?
112.
I didn't write down the page number. Maybe Mary or Denny knows where the hubs thing is.
112.
It's 7, like I said.
112 is correct. 112, page 112.
112, thank you. Yeah, and then one other item in that area on little changes like that, on page 179, it says regional centers are the hubs of commerce and local government service. And that's the only time out of 54 occurrences of the word hubs that it doesn't refer to the neighborhood hubs. So I think we should use different terminology there. And Denny had some words that he thought might fit in that.
Yeah, that was taken directly from the Metro definition for regional centers. But it does the word hubs. I thought it was something like areas of. It was just concentrated areas of, I think, is what I thought you could say, because it was.
Yeah, you said concentrated areas if necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the only terminology you could think of. But I just thought it was interesting that out of, well, actually 55 references, counting that one, that was the only one that didn't apply to neighborhood hubs.
Can we go back to the Foster question? I still haven't found it. What page again? 112?
Yeah. 112.
The first policy, 741.
Yeah, 741A uses the word foster.
And B.
B.
A and B.
And in other places, we just say encourage when we're talking about the hubs.
I mean,
Yeah.
I like foster, but I understand that if we're saying encourage in some places and foster in another, we maybe should figure out which it is we want to say.
Well, especially since foster also means encourage. So, but encourage doesn't necessarily also mean stimulate and advise.
I think in some ways, some of the earlier discussion was about including an effort to stimulate some of this redevelopment. So it's very light shading in the terminology and what it means. But we did hope for that. Yeah.
Foster does occur elsewhere in the document. I'm running the search now, and it occurs plenty of times. Yeah.
I think that was the intention in the committee too. There were discussions about how we would do that as a city, and discussions about that. We would probably have to land bank or things like that to really truly foster it. And so I think that was the intention of the committee. Yeah.
Good. But what I had kept hearing is the city just wants to establish that these could occur, but the city doesn't have any ability to do anything about them, really, other than by code, put money, effort, or staff into it. That's what we heard at neighborhood meetings. But if we mean
when your head is turned to the right like that, we can't
hear it. I'm sorry. Yeah. I have two laptops going, so I'm looking at the plan on one and talking on another. That's not good, right? Yeah. Just if that's what we intend, then that's fine. I understand that, or maybe even use the word stimulate. But doesn't. If everybody's okay with that terminology, I mean, I can live with it. I just thought it was unusual.
I don't know.
That was inconsistent, not unusual. I'm sorry.
To me, I mean, Denny was kind of going there. To me, foster is a tinge more of a commitment than encourage. You know, the difference is not really substantial, but I don't know. I kind of like foster there, I guess. And like I said, I've just run a search and we use foster at least a half dozen other places in the document. So.
Okay.
And I see what you're getting at, Wilda, in that are we making a promise to commit resources that we didn't necessarily need to commit? But I feel like this is one of those places where we don't necessarily know what opportunities will arise to be supportive. And so that's where I like the language that is a little looser, because we may, who knows, maybe there'll be an economic development grant that comes along that's just right to help us.
Right, and we apply for it and we get it, yeah. No, I think you're correct in that, you know, in thinking about it that way. So, you know, that's good.
Since we're in that part of the document on page 110, that's that box that talks about housing affordability and cost burden. And it defines what those mean, but it doesn't talk to numbers. It doesn't say an X number of people in Milwaukee are experiencing each of those. So that's why I think it's really important to have that when people are thinking about the people in Milwaukee and where they are and what they're experiencing, that's really clearly called out.
So you would like it in the call-out box as well?
I could go either way there, but certainly in that first page, it sort of sets the stage.
Right.
Yeah, I think it belongs in the first part, but I mean, the call-out boxes are generally definitional.
Yeah.
Kind of things. They're not, you know, statistical kind of things. So I wouldn't want to put it in the call-out box.
Okay.
So can we talk a little bit then about, Mayor, what data you would like to have there? Because this is where I had a note, but it sounds like folks are open to having more specific local data somewhere in the document, maybe on that previous page that you had mentioned. But I had a note about, you know, what this actually means locally, because when I look back at the H&A, or even at the most recent, it's obviously that, you know, the income is higher now. But using the H&A data, 85% of Milwaukee's households can no longer have the income to afford a home that's sold today on the market at the median household. The median sale price now is over $400,000. 85% of Milwaukeeans. So to me, that's remarkable, and it really illustrates, you know, the need and what you're talking about.
I agree. There was another data point that's kind of in that realm that I felt like we needed. It's not housing, but it's the, remember that infographic that we were seeing a lot a couple of years ago that would talk about this kind of job puts you in low income, this kind of job puts you in, you know.
They did use those at the kickoff event where and
the county has one of those that we used in the housing needs housing test.
I think the reason I think that's such a powerful infographic and really helpful is a lot of people, when we talk about building low-income housing, I don't know what they're imagining, but they're certainly not imagining the nurse's aide and the grocer and the welder and all the folks that are their neighbors right now who, as Angel just pointed out, can't afford any housing in Milwaukee right now. Mm-hmm. So if they lost their house, the firemen, yeah. So I think that graphic is super important to just really help people understand why these housing changes beyond the historic stuff, but just for literally the future of the people that live here, why they're so important.
So we have a graphic that's similar to that, but it's a little outdated. The numbers would need to be updated. We could put it in. It would probably take a full page, but we could consider putting it in the comp plan.
Could we, I know you, I think maybe you or Layla, someone sent it to me because I was having I had the same question about that infographic. It's really busy. It's 2 pages. Yeah. It's super busy, but I think we can maybe bring down some of the visuals and really, if we can nail down what data points we want to see and what, maybe because right now it's 2. It's how far does your mortgage go or how far does your rent go?
Right.
Basically those, we could combine that information,
I think we're talking about different graphics, but
maybe.
Well, and will that still be relevant to the comp plan, say 5, 10, whatever years from now? I mean, I'm not saying it will or won't. I'm just trying to figure that out in my head. If that's the representative graphic of where we are and who we are and whatever, what will what we're doing change so that won't be the relevant data at that point in time?
Undoubtedly, that the numbers themselves will be wrong, right? Because things are going to change. In all likelihood, it's going to be worse unless something dramatically different occurs in the United States of America. But
plus the newest census data is going to be coming out like within the next year. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to push pause real quick because the reason I think it's important is because, a lot of these plans, a lot of these documents don't look at, they don't have that trend to look on. And, even here, like we've got reference points from our H&A, which was done, I think, finalized in 2016. Then we've got some new stuff in the MHAS and, now we've got even newer data and next year we're going to have new census data. And, I think it's really good to have snapshots in a document like this and talk, because then it points to why are we doing this and what are the shifts that we're seeing, if right now, 85% of Milwaukeeans cannot afford to buy a house in Milwaukee today. Right. If we include some kind of an infographic like that, or the one that you're talking about with the, types of jobs and, what affordability looks like there, then when we come back to revisit this, we'll and we have then, so it's 20 years from now or however, when we do it, then we'll look at it and say, oh, okay, yeah, we're seeing, it's metrics. It's where we can actually measure ourselves. It's just another place for us to insert that data so that we can say did any of our policies help at all? Or how do we compare to the region?
Yeah, I think
so. Angel, would you think that would have a date on it? Like as of 2020, yes. I mean, I would think so because that's the only way we're going to, that's our,
Yeah, all these things
on foundation, and then you measure from there. Yeah.
All these things on page 11 have the date. Well, not all of them, but they should. If they don't, there's one that doesn't. The one that comes from this education school district doesn't. But they should all have a date.
I agree.
What day the data is, and the same thing with these things we're talking about.
Yeah, because then you can look back and go, wow, look how far we've come. We're now blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Where did you all land on the mayor's suggestion for the graphic that has the jobs and the housing type? Was that in or out? I mean, I think we left it with it's a complicated graphic.
I think the mayor has seen a different version than I've seen, so it's not as complicated, but.
Well, I mean, I think you're talking about apples and oranges, to be honest, because he's talking about the graphic of who's in what income bracket, and so who's making 80% of AMI, who's making 60% of AMI, what kind of job classifications, and you're talking about the purchasing power, and those were 2 different sets.
There's 2 different things.
There's one that combines them both. So that's what I thought we were talking about.
I'll just
Well,
say
you
that.
send those around to all of us and let us look at them. That'd be
Yeah, I was going to say I can forward that existing graphic we have. The data is outdated, even though it's only a few years old. But that might give you an idea of how it's structured. But I think, like Councillor Falconer said, it's a little busy. So we might want to change it a little bit, or we may just want to do two separate, either one talking solely about income and jobs, and then one being about housing, what you can afford in terms of housing.
Yeah, well, let's see it. Let's see what we need to do with it.
Yeah. And I'll just say that I've really appreciated that Mary has done a good job of putting some really complex information into some very simple graphics. So you are the right person for the job.
Good.
Well, our consultants also help too, but yes, thank you.
I might ask whether or not it intended to reopen the hearing today for any additional testimony, or
Yeah, it is currently open, and we were just waiting to see if anybody showed up or whatever.
there are five attendees right now.
Okay.
I don't know if any of them wanted to.
Well, I can get to that.
Well, wouldn't they have signed up in advance, and Scott would have that information?
Well, there weren't anybody no one had signed up in advance. That's correct. But there's still an opportunity to speak if somebody probably wanted to. I'm asking you guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
Should we just ask?
I'll ask. So does anyone wish to comment on the proposed comprehensive plan, updated comprehensive plan? If you do, and you're in the Zoom meeting, please raise your hand if you know how to do that. Scott, can you see all the participants?
I can. I see no hands raised, and I just checked the email box, and there's no one who's asked to speak in person or on Zoom.
We'll give you a minute here.
I wasn't sure whether I missed part of this.
You're just checked out, Denny.
Yeah.
Hearing nothing, could we continue?
Sure. And if anybody does wish to comment, we're doing this a little loose just because it's so bizarre with all the technology. So if you do wish to comment, raise your hand, and I'm just going to leave the hearing portion open for now while we go through this.
So on page 106, I had a comment I had submitted earlier about livability, and I had suggested some alternate language that just added benefits or opportunities to impacts, because I feel like a lot of the work we're doing right now, and this is in that first paragraph, is around making life better for our current residents, not just about making their lives worse. And impacts has negative implications and connotations to me.
Could I get you to repeat the page number, Councillor Heisey?
I'm sorry, 106.
Thanks.
So it would read, as a city that has experienced little growth over the last several decades, but yada, 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 the city needs to consider the impacts and benefits of growth and development on existing residents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or opportunities.
I don't think that's a bad idea.
I'm actually struggling with it a little bit, even starting with the premise that the only impacts are growth and development, because there are impacts of no development on our existing residents as well. They are getting priced out, and the housing for many of our residents doesn't meet their needs as they wish to age in place. So I'm actually struggling with this whole concept. If we're going to talk about, the impacts, whether they're positive or negative, of the increase in production, then we got to talk about the negative impacts of limiting supply.
Well, if you go back up,
if you scroll up a little bit, it's talking about key issues, and one of the key issues is affordability. As noted above, housing affordability has become a major issue in Milwaukee in recent years, leading to the declaration of a housing emergency, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of going there before.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah.
But I do think not painting further development as a pure negative is wise.
Well, so yeah, I think.
I mean, there was a lot of comment on this at the Planning Commission, and I think I like Councilor Heisey's recommendation to add impacts and add the idea of benefits or opportunities to impacts, but I don't think we should be removing the idea of impacts.
And I suppose under affordability and maybe and equity, then I think I would like to have something that supports development of new housing. Because here it says, however, the city has limited tools when trying to address and influence housing affordability, but doesn't mention that we control one of the biggest factors, which is our own zoning laws.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to take the conversation.
And it's good that we talk about developing housing affordability programs and partnering with, and I'm assuming we're talking about, nonprofits who provide affordable housing and that sort of thing. But I think that this is right here is where we need to actually state that changes to our zoning and land use designations is a tool that we have to help with affordability.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. Denny, any concerns? You're muted.
I got a really small screen and I was reading the text rather than looking at you guys. So, no, I think that's a great solution to add that.
As a quick reminder, everybody, when you're muted, you can press your space bar and unmute yourself momentarily.
You have to keep holding it down while you talk, though.
So I'm trying to, I have a note in here and I'm not remembering what I mean by it. Trying to decipher my own shorthand.
I can so relate to that kind of thing. Did I miss a word that I wanted? What did I do with that? You know?
I mean, maybe you just plan to go on ad hoc for today since we don't have that much more time today. But I mean, what is the plan for how we're going to move forward on this on the next go around? Are we going to go through everybody's sets of comments and see where we have consensus, or, you know, how are we going to do that?
Well, and I think it's important to keep in mind that there's new input, new testimony from the citizens that many of us have not had an opportunity to read, to absorb, or whatever, and staff hasn't had an opportunity to do that, to say, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'll have to ask council about that. I mean, it might change a lot of things between now and next week, or something.
Well, so I guess the matrix does give us some starting point, but
Yeah, I like
we
the
also
matrix.
have our own comments that we've submitted. Some of us have submitted in writing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's another starting point, but we have to figure out how we're going to go about it.
Well, and it feels like we've got enough of those little comments to, you know, if we can get those out of the way today, I think that's useful. I know I have a bunch that you've all seen from that matrix from last time we met that we can just work through, where staff indicated, yeah, this is probably a good idea. We want to be sure that this is what the whole of council wants.
Would you like us to move? I mean, there were some things that came by email today, our comments regarding the questions from Councilor Beatty and Councilor Parks. Would you like us to move those as well into the matrix format? Because that's really easy to do.
I think this is just me,
One of mine we've
but
already
I'm open to other people's ideas. But I think having one matrix that is input from the community, and then one matrix that is input from council.
Okay.
And we can kind of go through those. I don't know which we do first. We can talk about how we do that, but I think breaking it up into two matrices, but having all of the input from the community in one matrix is going to be a really useful way to try and go through this, because it's otherwise we're going to be all over the place, right? Between emails and things that people said, and then people Zoomed and all the stuff. So
Right. Well, and I forgive me, but I don't have the matrix in front of me, so I can't recall exactly how it's put together. But does it also is it also sectioned, or by the sections, or by policy? In other words, would we have all the comments about DEI in one area, or all the comments about affordable housing in one area? Because I don't want to go back and forth between page 1 and page 6, and you know what I mean.
that's an interesting idea. It's going to be a bunch of work for staff.
Well, because it's in Excel, we can actually shift things quite easily.
Yeah.
So if, like, say, for example, you say it's all section 7 point whatever, we can have them all
Okay.
pretty quickly, luckily, because Excel's.
Well, I would think that would be really valuable. And the other benefit to that is we would see maybe 4 community members had these particular comments about, 3.1.2, whatever.
Yeah.
But there were little nuances to them and that. Or it's like, well, we've already addressed those. They just didn't realize that yet, or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Working through that way might then also give counselors who had comments in that particular area the opportunity to sort of their inventory of issues out.
Well, so then that begs the question, do we want to go ahead and interlace council comments into that same matrix?
I thought, I'm going to shut up here in a second, but I thought maybe if you use the public matrix as the format to work through, counselors can pull their own in when you're talking about it.
Well, and my questions were actually based on my comments were based on the questions from the citizens at large, where I reposed their question and then said, well, it seems to me there's this, and this, and how does this fit, and whatever. So I think what Denny's talking about, and we just add our thoughts at that time would be good. Now, some of the others, though, I know were actual questions, and those, you might want to deal with some of those a little separately, but I don't know.
Well, we've still got, an hour almost. We could be working our way through some of those today. So that.
Yeah, because I think most of mine, one of mine was on affordable housing with a new comment based on what Renee Moog had sent in. So was kind of saying, okay, well, she says this, but is there a path to this? But from what I recall of Councilor Beatty and Councilor Heisey's notes, there were some really good questions that beg answers, I think, more so than some of the ones I sent in. So.
I want to throw out another possibility, which is we just use color coding to separate out or call attention. Mary's giving me a thumbs up. So that way it's all in one matrix, and we just color code so that counselor comments pop a little.
I like that. Yep.
Yeah, easier. Good. As long as it's easier for staff, that's cool.
Literally just going to suggest that, so.
Wilda, where did you see Renee Moog comments? I don't think I've seen those.
Oh, I saw them in an email, I think, a couple days ago. Did
everybody else get that?
Because, in fact, I wrote this, today's Tuesday, I wrote this Sunday. So it was over the weekend I saw her comments.
I just searched for her name in my emails and it's not coming up.
Didn't see anything?
Not recently. Yeah, no.
I know we got some for Planning Commission, but if they came in for the most recent council, at least on staff's end, we haven't gotten them.
Maybe they were Planning Commission. Maybe that's it.
I'm going to see if I can find it, and then I'll forward it to you guys. But I'm
just one approach for today.
I just noticed what it was.
You could take on one of the big topics for the rest of the day today, sort of like the DEI question. I don't know if you want to try to.
No.
I would not, because some of the comments today were really rational and spot on about the DEI, and I don't think everybody's had a chance to read that and absorb them.
I appreciate that. I was being hopeful.
Yeah, no.
Well, I think also at least Kathy and I and Ann, and I don't know who all else is going to be in a 2-day training on that just preceding the next hearing night. So I would prefer to hold that one off until then.
To the question about process, I would like for us to spend the rest of this time going through our little fiddly bits. Those take more time than any of us think they would, and see if we can get through our fiddly bit comments. And then I would imagine we just move through section by section in the future, and not necessarily 1, 2, 3, because we do have a couple of places where we know there's a lot of comments. So it may make sense to think about what sections have greater need for real discussion about them, and which ones we can move through fairly quickly and kind of group accordingly. And, I don't know if you want to do that, Mayor, or how we make that determination, but honestly, I think staff could probably do a pretty good job just based on the number of comments we've received on any one topic. And look at our schedule and say, okay, next time we meet, we have 2 hours of discussion time. What do we think would be reasonable to bite off in that period?
Well, we just work our way through the matrix until the 2 hours is up, and then we go to the next hearing. But yeah, I think if we have the matrix, so the piddly bits, getting rid of the piddly bits today is a good idea. So we can just keep working our way through everybody's.
Well, so Councilor Heisey's 2 pages, I had gone through them before the last meeting and gone, yes. Some of them were typo kind of things and just put check marks. And then I had a couple where I was like, maybe not. So, should we go through those?
Sure. I mean, everybody's got comments. Mine happen to be in a matrix, so they're easier to access. And in these, as far as I could see, it's the ones I'm thinking of are ones where it says in staff comments, if so requested by council. I think those are the ones where we do need to check in.
Have a conversation. All right, well, let's work our way through those. I don't have them in front of me, so you're going to have to. Good.
So her first thing is about the Grand Ron, it was about the Native history, and we've already agreed that we're going to look at that. Our second is on the Japanese farmers, and she and I have kicked around some language. I'm still a little concerned about that, but maybe we should kick that around some more.
I was trying to unmute myself, and instead I was scrolling through documents, and now I can't see my comments, but I was going to say something really smart about page 16.
Something really smart, did you say? Or
I was going to call attention to that set of comments. I think what I was about to say was we already had a discussion about some language problems on this page, and my understanding was that Councilor Feltner was going to come back to us with some language, so we can skip that. And on page 43, I had asked for, under planning for diversity, a brief mention of the fact that land use planning has historically created barriers to diversity within communities in the United States. I'm not tied to that phrasing, but just thinking along the lines of wherever we have opportunities to make sure that we're lifting up that history even just a little bit, I think is important. Because I know that if I'm looking at a document that's 200 pages long, I often will just cherry pick for the thing that I think is relevant, and I won't necessarily read all of the sections that might speak to this.
So I'm finally on page 43. Where are you talking about?
Under planning for diversity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I mean, the logical place for it is after the first sentence, right?
Yeah.
Tell me again what you were.
I said something about a brief mention of the fact that land use planning has historically created barriers to diversity within communities in the United States. And we could just even make that in Milwaukee.
You might be muted.
I'm sorry. I think Councilor Heisey, I think that your addition is fine. I think, I think especially if we supplement that section in the background, then I think that'll be an easy enough reflection.
I'm fine with that too.
I'm fine with that too.
Can we be a little bit more precise and say something about exclusionary zoning practices or something like that rather than land use?
That'd be great.
Yep. Okay. Good.
Okay.
On page 46, under policy 1.4.2, that's right. That's okay. I had just suggested that we add provide opportunities and training. again, what the text reads, so with that addition, it would be provide opportunities and training for NPAs to give relevant and effective testimony to the City Council and Planning Commission on matters affecting their neighborhoods.
And Denny's already done that to some degree, but it's definitely something we should continue. Yeah.
I think we're going to do it again.
Are you imagining that like annually or every other year or every 3 years there's a training for the NDAs? Or, I mean, I'm trying to get a sense of what we're committing the city to.
I didn't feel a need to be prescriptive around that. I more wanted to call out that we give a lot of responsibility and have a lot of expectations of NDAs around land use planning. And so I feel like we have a responsibility to also provide some education around that. I know that Denny's Planning 101 series was, the 2 times he did it, was pretty well received. So if it's something along those lines, that's great. If, Jason wants to do something that's at the leadership meetings, I'm open.
Yeah, I don't think we probably should be too specific about what it is. I mean, Anne would probably have concerns about that. She's not here to object, but if we start putting in a requirement for how frequent or whatever, I think, that's probably not a road we should go down.
Well, that was actually who I was channeling in that moment is what are we setting ourselves up for?
I'm sorry to do this. I really need to go back because there's something that really jumped that we accepted something that I'm struggling to get it. Back on planning for diversity, we went with a more restrictive exclusionary zoning instead of land use planning, and I'd actually prefer us to go the opposite direction. Housing and transportation planning has historically created barriers. I think would be better. I don't. It's not just a matter of exclusionary zoning. That was sort of a tricky workaround for people to get around some court decisions that made it so that other policies that were already in place. So I actually want to pull the lens back. We need to be a little bit more broad when we talk about that. And I think this, that resolves my issue talking about housing.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and absolutely. I keep forgetting about transportation because we basically have kicked that down the road, but you're right that that's a very crucial part of that puzzle.
Is that okay? Housing and transportation planning?
I'm good with that. Yep.
So on page 71, I had raised a question, and this is in a section where we talk about, I believe, air quality.
What page was it again?
What page?
Page 71.
71. Okay.
I had asked for policy 3.6.3, which reads support local efforts such as good neighbor agreements and partner with community organizations or governments that aim to evaluate and reduce local sources of air and noise pollution and their impacts on local residents. And I had just raised the question of, well, since we live with a sewage treatment plant within our boundaries and we have a committee that works in part to address odor mitigation, is there reason to call out odor as well as air and noise pollution? We do talk about the plant odor specifically in a different section in policy 10.3.5. So I don't have strong feelings about this.
No, I absolutely agree. We should do it. I mean, it is where we have the most established good neighbor agreement that we have as a city. So, yeah, I think we should add it. I don't see any downside to that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So on page 93, under cost and capacity, there's a sentence that reads that the city will need to consider and balance economic concerns and adequately budget for climate change. And I can't put my finger on it, but there's something in that language that feels a little clunky to me, and I'm not sure how it goes with the fact that earlier this year when we were discussing the climate action goal, we dropped discussion of costs from that particular goal. So I don't really have a clear solution here, and staff responded that they're open to revisions, but that the section was reviewed by the Public Works Director and the Climate Change and Sustainability Coordinator.
Kathy, where on that page are you talking about?
On page 93 in the second column, under the cost and capacity section.
Got it. Okay.
The very last sentence.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
I think to me, those two questions were coming at it from two different directions. So when we removed it from our climate state of emergency from the comp plan, or our cap from when we did the climate state of emergency, that was taking away the opportunity for some future council to say it's too expensive, or whereas this is actually giving instruction to some future council to put money in the budget for it. So it's, I think, but that's my.
And I understood that to be the intent. There was just something about it that sat a little weird. So mostly this is a gut check with everyone else to see, is this just me, or is there something to that?
Well, we could, I would be fine with a more strongly worded statement that says the city needs to ensure that it is adequately budgeting funds to address climate change, or
quit channeling Ann.
He did. And I'm not sure that prescriptive language, more prescriptive language there is quite what I was worried about. It was more that there was something in that language that felt to me like it was open to that interpretation that you just named, that maybe
because we're balancing economic concerns.
Yeah. I mean, I will also say that I know that there are things we could do as climate actions that would be extremely expensive and would do something, and I don't want to set us up to say we have to do those either. That's not my intent.
This is just the background section, sort of describing the issues. It's not the policy. So.
Yeah, I think it's just me is what I'm getting generally. So I'm happy to move on. On page 98, under policy 6.3.2, it says how small cities can adapt. And I just requested that we add how small cities can mitigate and adapt, because that's a lot of the work that we're doing in trying to be an example to other small cities is both.
I agree.
If you're following along on the matrix, I did have a comment on page 105, but I really think I'm just going to drop that about not mentioning HB 2001 on page 105. I see Angel nodding, so maybe this is something she also feels strongly about. So I'll stop saying I'm going to drop it and let her start talking.
Well, it's actually, I don't think it's, I mean, my comments are, yeah, we embarked on this process long before those bills were even drafted. So I really don't like their inclusion in this document. But that also is a segue into much meatier comments that I have. So I'll just bookmark them, I guess, for now, because I've got lots of concerns about that.
I'm good with that. On page 122, I made a request to add, let's see, a reference in this section to the MPA map and page number. I found section 12 difficult to follow in many ways. And that was putting on the hat of our average resident who's trying to follow along. And what I noticed is when we all talk about a lot of these issues, we talk about the UGMA. And in this document was the first time I realized that that stood for Urban Growth Management Agreement, not area. So in my mind, the UGMA has always had a boundary around it. And I think we often do speak about a lot of these issues in that way. So mostly my comment was I find some confusion in here, and I suggested that a reference to the MPA map, which is already in here, and a page number could be helpful, because I found that when I was reading policy 8.1.9, I immediately was like, where's a map? Where's a map of this?
So just like a C page X for the map or C figure X.
Yeah, super simple.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I had a comment, although I didn't write it down in the ones I sent you, I guess. So now that makes me think maybe I backtracked from it. But I just want to make sure I understand. So the MPA is the land that is encompassed by what we think our UGMA reaches.
Yes.
Right?
That was the idea. It was to try to eliminate the confusion of having the UGMA mean both things.
So I guess I felt like that needed to be, like called out. Sorry, I've lost my page. I'll look at that again before the next meeting, but I felt like that needed to be more clearly defined to me, what the MPA was. I was like, the MPA, what's that? So what that is in relation to the agreement was, I didn't feel like was that clear. So, but I'll look at it again before the next meeting.
So in the first page of that section, we have a box about the UGB, the urban growth boundary, and maybe the first time we hit the MPA, we ought to just have something else, something like that.
Yeah, I think a call-out box could be useful.
Is that a call-out box for the Urban Growth Management Agreement or the?
No, it's defining the MPA, what the MPA means. One other thing in this section that Councilor Parks had pointed out, and maybe we said this last time, I can't recall. It was about that portion of the urban growth management area before it becomes named MPA, that is on the east side of the freeway, that there was an agreement with Happy Valley, a letter agreement that said that we were basically giving that area to Happy Valley. I think we need to add a note on the map to that, to say that. So on page, let's see, 164, there, the furthest east portion of the MPA is on the east side of the freeway. That needs a different hatching pattern. And then it needs to be included in the, it needs like a call out stating what it is, or it needs to be in the legend.
I had in this section also suggested that we add the Clackamas Regional Center to the glossary, and maybe to a map as well. And I just think that would be helpful in part because I don't know that that is going to be called the Clackamas Town Center 10 or 15 years from now. I think that the future of malls is questionable at best. So demonstrating on a map and a definition what we mean by that future councils might think us. And that's the last of my fiddly bits. Thank you for all of your patience, everyone.
Lisa, do you want to go through yours? Or start at least?
Sure, we can. I need to pull them up. Hold on.
We can do a musical interlude.
Are you going to sing?
I don't think I'd sound good with a mask on. I could do the Jeopardy theme song. I know Wilva could help me with that. Do, 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 do.
Yeah, we can do that. Do, 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 do.
We had a musical intro to the CPIC meeting the other night. Stefan had his guitar and he sat and did a little,
Nice.
We're all gathering. He played a little guitar for us. Okay. The thing is, I was searching by Denny, being an email from Denny. And of course, I have a lot of those today with all the comments that came in late. Okay. So my first one on the Willamette Greenway. So yeah, Denny, can you just talk about this whole Greenway design plan and what exactly the thinking is there? I mean, you've written a response here, but it might be just easier if you talk us through that.
And that is section 4 for everyone, right?
Yes. The statewide planning goal references Willamette Greenway design plan as a way to avoid going through a public hearing every time to determine whether a use complies with the Greenway goal. So it gives the option to local governments to adopt a Greenway plan, a Greenway design plan. And we are in the current plan, we have policies that call for that. We've never done it. So going through the Greenway process has always entailed a conditional use process. What we were talking about here was calling out our existing parks plans as an element, or Greenway design plans for those parts of the Greenway. So we have these parks plans, so we wouldn't necessarily have to go through a conditional use process to implement the park plan each time we need to do something. So what the policy language says is it acknowledges that, and then it says for those other areas, it just leaves the option open for the city to adopt a Greenway design plan for those areas. That would include the areas along Riverway Lane. There are no, and then some of the areas along 19th. But I don't know if we need to. I mean, it was the idea that, you know, it gives us the option to do it if we want to, but we don't have to do it. And there's in the Greenway section, it was also, it calls for establishment of the compatibility review boundary, which could be not as distant from the river as the current boundary. I mean, we have areas inside the Greenway where you can't see the river today. And that it's always seemed odd that we put people through the Greenway review process when they're that far away from the river. There's a couple of things in here. One is establishing that Greenway compatibility review boundary and making a distinction on how we treat property on either side of that boundary. And then a Greenway design plan, which could be more specific guidance for what people do inside that compatibility review boundary. Is that clear? I mean, it's a little complicated, but that was the thinking there.
So, yeah, it's not 100%. I mean, it was clear when you talked about just Greenway design plan, but when you added in the review boundary, it became less clear. But I'll reread it on that. But on the Greenway design plan, can we just twitch our nose and say the Kronberg and the Milwaukee Bay plans are our Greenway design plan, or do we have to get some kind of state approval for that?
I think I was kind of hoping we were going to twitch our noses and do it, but maybe we ought to highlight it, and we could do it by resolution probably.
To make it more burdensome than it is, I just know that the state is very particular about the Greenway, and so I just want to.
Maybe we should let me get back. Let me do a little research on that and get back to you.
Sorry, I think we lost the mayor. Are you able to hear everything that's going on? Okay, I think we need to. Are we working on getting back?
It's doing the spinning beach ball of death. So, why don't you call for a couple-minute recess?
Why don't we take a couple-minute recess?
Should we just?
Oh, it is 20 minutes till.
20 till 6.
We just got 20 more minutes or 15 or whatever.
Okay. All right.
We would need a motion to continue the hearing.
Wait.
Would you like to make a motion to continue this public hearing until June 16th?
So we're leaving public comment open?
Yes. Although typically we close it and open it. Is that what we typically do?
Yeah, you could close it, and then if you were to close it, you can reopen it next time. Or Denny, my impression is that they have we're really flexible because this is a legislative matter, so you could make 2 motions if you wanted to. Or
What do you mean 2 motions? What would they
close the public hearing, which ends the comment, which there was none tonight, and then you could reopen that next time too.
Uh-huh.
So that actually raises a question for me, because I'm wondering, is there going to be a point where we do close comments because we keep getting more comments and we keep ending up in the situation where we can't process what we have heard.
We had been
Right.
all along to keep it
Well,
open.
and especially when we get them 2 hours
Mr. Mayor, they
before.
can't.
Yeah, so we can't hear the mayor. So I think what we did last, now that I think we all have, now we've decided we're going to go through June 30th. So last time, I think what we did was, I don't think we closed the
You just
public.
motion to continue.
We just motioned to continue. So I
Right.
think we can move to continue.
If we want to continue to accept public testimony, but is that what we need to do at this point, or have we, in the opportunity so far, provided enough, I mean, for the community? Just posing the question to give us food for thought.
I mean, I don't have a strong feeling either way about closing the public testimony. I think nothing we've done tonight has been that substantive that people should be wanting to respond to it.
Right.
But what we do next Tuesday might be, maybe it would be nice to close public testimony just to not have an influx of letters and testimony before next Tuesday at the last minute next Tuesday again. I don't know. I'm sort of ambivalent about it.
You could set a time frame also. You could say we'll take testimony up until a certain time. It gets awkward though to do that, but you have a lot of options on how you do it.
Okay. Well, I'm not hearing super strong feelings about closing the public comments portion of the hearing, so.
Sure. If before we close, I know Councilor Parks had something to say about the reason we are closing a little earlier. And
Oh, yeah, thank you. Of course, I think most of City Council, as my understanding, is headed towards Milwaukee Bay Park and the rally that is going on for Black Lives Matter. Love your shirt, Angel. That's great. And because I am still one of those people who has stay-at-home orders, I'm not going to be there, but I'll be there in thought. So if the rest of you would please let folks know why I'm not there, and I appreciate that. I'll see it all either on TV or on our videos or something, I'm sure. So yeah, I'll be thinking of you though, and it's bumming me out that I'm sitting here on my couch.
Yeah. Wilda, I can tell she was just speaking to how much that she would like to be there with us. I don't know if you've gotten back on yet, Mayor.
No.
So Wilda, we will miss you very much this evening's event, and we'll keep you posted. And I'll try to snag.
Yeah.
I'll try to snag you one of these T-shirts.
Good. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Appreciate
Do we
that.
have a motion?
I will make a motion to continue the hearing until June 16th.
I'll second.
No, go ahead.
It's been moved and seconded to continue the hearing on the updated comprehensive plan to a date certain of June 16, 2020. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Not, and opposed? None heard. Passes unanimously. We will see you next week.
Hope you
All right, thank you, guys.
I don't have a
good,
gavel.
safe evening. So
We actually need to make a motion.
take care of yourselves.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm being
We
corrected.
need to make a motion to close the hearing, to end the meeting.
Oh, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Excuse me.
Also,
Move to adjourn.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. We will see you next week. Thank you.
All right, guys.